This podcast provides a platform for our guests to express their own personal views and opinions. Some or all of these views and opinions may not be shared by Ben and/or Yoel.
Welcome to the Too Dad to Quit podcast,
the podcast where we highlight stories of dads on the other side of divorce
to inspire and give strength to dads going through it.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Yoel.
Welcome to the Too Dad to Quit podcast. You can find us on toodadtoquit.com, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We really want to hear your story, share your story. Please reach out to us, comment, like, share. Make sure to rate us on all the podcast platforms. That will help get our word out and get our stories out, get your stories out. And let's see if we can help as many people as possible. This week, we are sitting with Yochanan Pollack. He's a therapist. He's also a divorced father. He has a super blended family. And we don't hold back. It was an honest conversation with a therapist about therapy, his philosophies on therapy. There was, in my opinion, there were no topics we didn't really touch. And he has that special insight of, he's been through it, and he looks, I would recommend him. I don't know if he serves all areas, but if I was looking for a therapist, he would definitely be on my top list. And we just met a few minutes ago. I think he had his deep insight into marriage, into relationships, into self reflection, and it was just a joy to talk to him.
Yeah, I echo that, Ben. I go way back with Yochanan, and I definitely warmly recommend Yochanan as well. And you used a great word, honest. I was going to say Yochanan is just so authentic and genuine, and he really brings that personal experience and also expertise, and he speaks so well. He's so articulate, and he really, I felt it was almost as if I was having my own personal therapy session on the podcast. Like you said, we were covering all sorts of topics, and his answers were bang on. I found myself really relating to everything that he was saying. And I'm very excited for our audience to hear what he has to say, because it was wonderful, to use a term that Yochanan used.
Yeah, exactly. And let's get right into it.
Welcome, Yochanan. Super excited to have you on the Too Dad to Quit podcast. And just want to introduce you for our audience. Yochanan lives in Jerusalem with his wife, Shani, and their blended family, which means he has children from a previous marriage. She has children from a previous marriage, and they have children together. Yochanan was divorced 8 years ago and remarried, as I mentioned. Yochanan is a private and couples therapist. I'm very excited to have our very first guest as a therapist on the podcast. Yochanan draws on his experience to help others going through the tumultuous waters of relationships. I'm happy I pronounced tumultuous right. And the relationships to oneself being the center of it all. And we're going to get into that in the podcast. Yochanan enjoys the Jerusalem vibe. He resides in Jerusalem, Israel, and riding his bike. I remember that you're an avid biker and a swimmer. That I didn't know about you. And I've known Yochanan a long time. We actually met each other through a very close mutual friend who we're both still very much in touch with. And Yochanan, thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So actually, I want to cut straight to the Too Dad to Quit moment, because
wow. Okay.
You've been studying.
Cut to the chase.
Ben is the video editor here, so among many.
Oh, it could come out at the end.
Hats that he wears. So Ben, is that okay with you?
Let's do it.
I'll tell you. Well, you mentioned biking, and you remember that I'm a biker. Well, we could have several moments, but one real moment is, being a single father of three. My oldest was 11, my middle was 7, and then I had a 5-year-old girl. So 2 boys and a girl, and living in a tiny 2-bedroom, really 1.5-bedroom apartment here in Nachlat Achim near Gan Sacher. And the way we got around was bikes. And we would be biking everywhere. Okay, everybody, get on your gear and, helmets and ticks or whatever it is, knapsacks, bags, and water bottles in the holsters. and we would be biking around the whole neighborhood. So it became quite a thing to see Yochanan and his kids, like the duck and the ducklings, everyone's biking. And I had a little seat on my back for my 5-year-old. And that's how we operated. So
that is awesome. That is awesome.
Yep, I'm known as the guy around town that rollerbladed a stroller with one kid in the seat, one kid on the second seat, another kid on the step part of it, and I would rollerblade them in the morning and rollerblade them back. And every once in a while, you get like one message on Facebook: "Are you crazy? What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm having the time of my life. This is awesome."
That's great. I would love to see that.
I'm sure I can find it.
Oh, that's amazing.
I actually have one of my closest friends is one of those people that yelled at me, but he's since learned that I'm not crazy, so that's good.
We're just a little, but that's also good.
Right.
There is an element to the individuality and the being able to express ourselves in our own, dadship. That I don't know if you've seen these videos. Every now and again, you come across like these only dad moments on Facebook or on YouTube, where you see dads with their kids doing things, when mom's not around.
Yeah.
That's so funny because I just forwarded to Ben. One of the guys on our bucket list is Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, and I just forwarded to Ben one of these. I don't know, it was a YouTube short or Facebook clip or whatever, where he's literally doing bicep curls with one of his kids, and it was just very sweet to see. And I also like to see when it's also a celebrity, somebody in the public eye. A lot of us tend to sort of look at them in a certain way, but at the end of the day, they're dads just like we are. One of the many reasons we want to get these guys on our podcast, and just having fun with his kids. And it was really sweet to see. And I had to forward that to Ben, also because Ben has a man crush on The Rocks.
And I'm gonna drop that video in this right here, so everybody enjoy.
Awesome. By the way, Yochanan, so in addition, just sort of as I always say on the podcast, especially when I start the intro, there's really no structure here, especially because you started off with your too dad to quit moment. Just about hobbies, you mentioned biking, swimming. I didn't know about. I see the guitars in the background. Is that yours, or is that the missus's?
One each.
Wow.
But she's better than I am.
Oh, okay. Well said.
When I was going through the end of my marriage and the separation and the beginning of my new marriage, I was picking it up a lot more often. And, that's an important part of what, I as a therapist would share with, people, that don't be afraid to put on different hats at different times in your life. Because what you find therapeutic value in and what you use to connect and to cope and to deal with things is extremely important. And absolutely, a guitar could be your best friend when you're feeling down or when you're feeling alone and you just want to connect through music, and even learning a new skill. Like, I wasn't so proficient at it, but like the last year, I would say, of my marriage, I put myself more into it, just with the needing that expression and the feeling it gives you, and the sense of accomplishment also that it gives you. There's a lot of things going on with all of our hobbies.
And do you still, because you mentioned the aloneness, do you, you could either talk about yourself or your patients, whatever you're comfortable with. Do you have loneliness still? I'm sure a lot of people out there wonder about that, because you're, thank God, happily remarried, have a very active life, practice, family. And do you still feel loneliness at times, even through all that? And if so, how do you deal with that?
So, I will say that you're right. I am very busy, and certainly there is very rare to feel that type of loneliness. Thank God I'm remarried. We have 4 kids together still. So that's 4 babies really together.
Wow.
Still. A 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So
wow.
We were, and that's really my second too dad to quit moment, which is, having the courage, or just having whatever it is, maybe the gall to say, I'm going to be a dad again to small children. And My wife had one daughter before I had three, and she really wanted to have a family. And I was a bit hesitant, and I said, of course, I want to have a family, but I would like to have maybe a smaller family, spaced out. And that was something that I had to reach inside my, this part of me that loves being a father and wants to be a father, and bring that part out of me to kind of quiet down the other voices inside me, which was like, are you crazy?
Yoel doesn't know that voice at all.
Well, I'm chomping at the bit here, so I'm really going to get into the nitty gritty here. So I'm curious, do you think that may be a function of age? So, I don't know how old you were. I think you were pretty young when you got divorced, and also when you got remarried pretty quickly, if I remember. And do you think that also could, and it's not to take away credit from that inner work that you did to get yourself to that point where you're ready to start a new family, but do you think that could be a function of age? For example, where somebody, I'm 43, for example, and I've got 5 kids, and we're the same age, but it can be very overwhelming for somebody to look at the prospect of starting again and, not wanting that. What would you say to somebody who feels that? What's your opinion about that?
Well, first of all, if you felt that way, you'd be normal. And you'd be realistic. And I think, they're all different. I don't like to, gender classify things, like, oh, women want to have more children, or they're less rational than men, and men are more rational, because you have men who are less rational, more into fantastical thinking, and you have some women who are very practical. But big gadol, meaning in general, there is a bit of a divide where there is a real desire for women to have children. And if your partner wants to have children, so then I would advise certainly getting on board, unless there's extenuating circumstances, because it's a real want and a need for someone. And for my wife, it was very important, just something she really wanted. And so, to embrace that, and to embrace it gracefully, that's the trick, to be graceful about it, and not to, allow your resistance to come too much to the fore, where it could become a marital issue. But you'd be normal, you'd be sensible, you'd be, practical. If you said, I have 5 children, I'm 43 years old, I'm going to focus my resources, finances, time, energy on the children that I have. And obviously I'm going to, and in any marriage or any serious relationship, you have to prioritize your spouse. So it's top down, really. You are constantly filling your cup, right? Which is what the last blurb in my bio was, having that healthy sense of self-centeredness, where you put yourself first and you keep pouring into that cup till it overflows to your spouse or partner, the person you're living with, you're partnering with, and then keep pouring in that cup and keep pouring in her cup. Keep allowing it to flow over to her. And then that allows for the family, the children, everyone else to get. So to not want to add more people to that list of how much you feel like you could pour into is reasonable. The question is, can you dig deeper and say, I can love more, I can give more? And it's a big ask. And you have to be honest with the answer, but with a little healthy nudge of encouragement of I can do this.
Would you say somebody who's, looking to get back out there at whatever stage post-divorce, okay, and they say, and that could be a man or a woman, obviously, depending on the circumstances. I also know of, like you said, we can sort of talk in generalities, but there are also cases where men want to have children or more children and women don't. I know of situations like that. Would you say somebody is limiting themselves by saying, I don't want to go out with anybody, I don't want to date anybody from the get-go who wants to have more children?
You certainly would be limiting yourself if you did that. But again, it all comes down to what's really your truth. I believe, and I think my wife and I went through this experience of, let's say I was more hesitant or I was scared not to have one or two. I wanted to have one or two children with her. I was 35 at the time. I had 3 children. She had 1 child, but we for sure got married with the intention of having children. I just didn't have the intention of having so many and so close together. But and that wasn't my experience in my first marriage. My 3 children were spaced apart. So this was overwhelming to me. But I think the main thing really to tell ourselves and the listeners here is that if the marital harmony is really intact and there's trust and there's encouragement, sky's the limit of what you're capable of. The same way we know that we only use a certain amount of our brains, and if we would have, enough meditation or enough nirvana, peace of mind, we'd be able to access more of our intelligence, more of our minds. Well, it's the same thing with our hearts and the same thing with our energy levels. The more safe we feel, the more encouragement we have, the more solid the partnership really is in a trusting, meaningful, loving way. Well, then, we can do a lot more. And it's when we start limiting ourselves, it's because we feel limited, because we're not necessarily feeling like we're in such a supportive environment. It doesn't have to be your spouse. It could be any kind of not supportive environment. You could feel worried about the finances. So whatever it is, if there is a deep sense of support, encouragement, and we're in this together, and the we can attitude, so then it's possible to get back in the game and do these things. Is it always the right thing? That's for everyone to decide on their own, their inner compass, to really know what's good for them, what's right for them.
So I once heard someone say that when they were dating, the girl that they were dating said that they feared that the person didn't have enough love for them and the kids. And they didn't even know how to respond to that. Because, to them.
Well, when my wife told me that, when my second wife, Shani, told me that, I listened and I said, I can love you better. I can do better. We were sitting in a coffee shop and we had gotten into an argument, and she, thank God, she's healthy enough. Not everyone's healthy enough to even say that. So whoever said this statement of like, I don't feel like you love me enough, that already is a sign of good health in a person, where they could express that in a not angry way, in a not resentful way, in a way that's not pulling back and regressing into our, more childlike states of mind. So, to have someone who could express that is extremely important. I remember I watched one of your podcasts with Zach, and he talked about imago. So sometimes you could have a dialogue that's taking a hot topic, like, do you love me? And, do you love me enough? Do you love my kids enough? And being able to, have that conversation in a safe way. And thank God I could say that I was staring across the table, in the cafe from my wife, my relatively new wife, who told that to me. And I had a moment there where I was like, am I going to defend myself? Am I going to push back? Am I going to draw blood here? Maybe you don't love me enough. Like, how am I going to? Or I paused and I felt my feelings, which is, what I'm always trying to do as a therapist, trying to help people pause and first feel what they feel before they react. And then making a conscious decision to say, love is a choice a lot of times. Before you're married, you want to make sure you're compatible. You want to make sure the chemistry is there, and you do your best to ascertain that. And second time around, I could tell you, I was in a much better place to know what I was looking for, who I was looking for, what our language communication skills were like. I was like, okay, Shani and I could communicate. We can talk. We understand each other. I could finish her sentences. It wasn't this esoteric. It wasn't this, other dimension. It was very practical, feet on the ground. I understand you and you understand me. But when we got into some arguments later on in the marriage, then there's choices to make. And I had to expand my heart, choose to love her better. And that was very empowering for me, because I realized I'm not a victim of the relationship. I can make it better.
Wow, beautiful.
Right. I read a quote recently that is, marriage is more about learning how to love your spouse than it is being in love with your spouse. Mature love is a choice, not a feeling. So I think what you're saying kind of falls in that bracket. But when my reaction to that story was, well, of course you can love. Your love expands. It's not limited to one thing. It's a thing that keeps growing. You can have it, I love my friends like a brother.
Right.
And it's gonna sound weird. I consider myself like a love machine. Like, I attract people, friends. I just gather people and I feel for them. And if anybody needs anything, I'll drop everything for them. So to me, I've always done that. And that's just the way I've been. And when, you hear something like that, you're like, how did they not learn that? Of course, they're going to love you and love additional yous. Like, it was such a foreign concept to me. Just hearing someone, it wasn't that you don't love me enough. It was, I think you're going to take away from my love and give it to the kids. And I'm going to suffer less. You're going to have less love for me because you giving it to like something you take, you have this amount of love and then you give pieces of that love. And when you run out, there's no more to give. That was kind of how I understood what was the story.
Interesting.
I'm
not sure I'm getting it. She was saying it to him?
Yeah.
That That if he was gonna love
if we have kids,
uh-huh.
You're gonna love the kids more than you're gonna love me, because now part of your love that's 100% me is gonna have to go 10%, 10%, 10%, 50% me.
That's a scarcity. I don't know this person, but I'm saying that sounds to me like a scarcity approach, like with everything, right? One could look at life with an abundant outlook, whether it's finances or love, or one could say that it's scarcity. There's only a finite amount of love to go around, and this is going to break into that. Would you say that? Yochanan? It sounds like a real scarcity.
Yeah, that's spot on. That's spot on. For me as a therapist, I would want to, have a conversation with her and ask her, where that fear is coming from. Maybe it's coming from childhood. Maybe she had siblings. Maybe she felt like her parents couldn't love everyone the same, or maybe she felt that way in her own parents' marriage. But that would be a much longer conversation with her. What I would tell him, and that to respond, I would ask him seriously. I was like, do you want to love her more and more and more? Like, is that something you really want? Is your heart going in that direction? Because if you want it, we say something in the rabbinic literature that says, I'll say it in Hebrew first. It says, "Ein omed lifnei haratzon," which means nothing stands before man's will. So if he really wants her, and it's important to answer that question with an emphatic yes, I want her, and I want to love her. Everybody, it's a deep need to be wanted. It's a deep need to be appreciated, cherished, and these things need to be in place beforehand. Will kids throw a spanner in the works? Of course they will. You're not going to be able to go out. You're not going to be able to go to Rome, or you're not going to be able to stay out late at night, and your sex life will be disrupted, and you'll be pregnant, and you'll be tired, and she'll be throwing up, and she won't look as good, and he'll be stressed out because financially, life is life, as my 6-year-old likes to say. My 6-year-old Alicia, he says, "Abba, life is life."
Love that.
So, and now the other kids are saying it. It's funny. So yeah, is life going to throw you off course at times and draw on your energy and create situations where you're shorter, where your temper is short sometimes, or you're more tired? Of course. But so will being hungry. So will a lot of things. You don't love me when you're hungry. Damn straight, woman. Feed me. It's about being able to regulate our emotions with all that is, and like I think what Yoel said about scarcity, I wouldn't have necessarily said that or put it that way, but I think you're spot on. That that it is a scarcity approach, that there's not enough to go around. But will things become difficult and challenging? Yes. Is he going to be giving attention? Often, I mean, you guys must know this, often it's the man who feels that way, who suffers when his wife has a baby. And it's a famous thing psychologically that, after a couple has a baby, the man feels left out. She's with the baby a lot. She's nursing the baby. She's taking care of the baby, and he feels a bit left out. And that is a common occurrence.
So I guess in the second time around, so to speak, something that I've tried to do is figure out red flags and things so I don't make the same mistakes again. Or is there something that I should have known that I didn't see? Or like, do you have a list of red flags? Would that scenario be a red flag if someone said they didn't understand that, love can be boundless? Or is that something you think that could be worked through?
Let's call it a yellow flag. In other words, it's something that needs to be worked through. And if it can be worked through, if the other person at the end of that conversation says, okay, yeah, I never thought of it that way. That's actually a good way of thinking about it. Maybe I struggle a bit with that. But I love the way you think about that. That's great, expansive. And if I fall into those moments where we say also mitzamtzem, where I'm limiting things, wow, lend me a hand to pull me out of that moment, because it's really about being able to work together and communicate. Number one is communicate. If they can't communicate, if they really don't understand each other, even in the dating phase, if they really don't agree with each other already in the dating phase, where they don't feel like they're on the same page with a few issues like that, it's not a red flag. It's just called, not compatible. We're not this. Why do that to ourselves? Why move in and decide to spend the rest of my life together with someone who we don't understand or they don't understand? Even if you want to say it's not scarcity and abundance, let's say her thought is a totally legitimate, healthy way of thinking, and his way is a totally healthy way of thinking. But if they can't figure out that both of you if they can't see the health in each other, if they can't see the positive idea in what each other is presenting, and he sees it as a negative thing, or she sees his thing as a negative thing, well, that's already toxic. You don't want negativity. Will it come? Of course it'll come. There's lots of things. We all fall from grace. We all have our downs. We all have days, like I gave an example of being hangry, but we all have, days where we are in a smaller mind frame, where we are feeling limited. We're human. We're gonna have ups and downs. We're not always in this mind of abundance. We all fall into this hard place of like, I'm not feeling appreciated. I don't feel like I'm loved enough. I don't feel like I'm really, of course we feel that way sometimes. It's our job, though, to take responsibility over our own feelings and come back to a place of love within myself. And if I love myself and then I look across the room and say, hey, babe, if you don't love this, if you don't love me, that's your problem. I love me. I know I'm awesome. I know I'm great. I'm not perfect, which means to say that I'm not always feeling this way. But when I get in touch and when I have time for myself and I could recalibrate, another word you used previously in the podcast.
He did his homework. Wow, good for you.
You guys are doing a great job.
Thank you.
Guys are doing a great job providing a real service, getting real people on here to talk about real things. And I commend you. And that's why I agreed to do this. I looked into it a little bit before I gave you my answer. And then I think the next day I called you back. I said, let's talk.
Yeah.
And I saw that it was a well done, valuable tool for people and a good service. But anyway, so, this idea of being able to have, that's what I learned in my divorce. I was a therapist for many years and I was helping people for many years. And I myself was in therapy for many years. So I was on this journey of development, of looking at myself, of, understanding my parts and my ego and my pain and my wounds and learning to love myself But it wasn't till I was a single dad alone, feeling that feeling of totally being unloved and rejected by this person that I had chosen to love numerous times, despite the fact that there were sometimes, I guess now, insurmountable challenges. And really fighting for and really choosing to be there. Of course, spending a lot of the time not there, retreating into self and behaving poorly and licking my wounds and turning over and, not wanting to engage. Plenty of that, because you're in a crucible of pain in a bad marriage. Anybody who's been in a bad marriage, painful marriage, knows this. But I used to come back so often with more choices to be more willing to try and to make it better. And it wasn't still, even after all of that work. And I would literally say years of therapy and counseling and marital therapy and imago counseling, learning how to communicate. Better when we were using the rules and less better when we were not, when we were breaking the rules, but still to the point where I remember where I was standing. It's actually downstairs from where I live right now. I got remarried and I moved upstairs to the Pennsylvania.
Wow.
I was living in the basement with my 3 kids before, a small, a little bit dark, hardly any windows. And I remember sitting on the street corner, literally on the street corner, doing one of my, checking in, what am I feeling? Because I was feeling overwhelmed. I was feeling stressed out. So just to give you guys a little bit of therapeutic value in this podcast, since, that's part of my guestship here.
Yes.
Is that when you are feeling overwhelmed and dysregulated, which is normal when you're going through tough stuff, and you're feeling dysregulated, that overwhelming feeling, the goal is to bring it down into the emotions and to try to, really isolate and identify what am I feeling emotionally. And I like to call it the primal feelings, based on a book called Primal Scream by Arthur Janov. Very interesting read. I read the book 20 years on because it's more developed. He did a lot of experiments. And over there, he calls the 6 primal feelings: happy, angry, sad, scared, lonely, and guilty. And I try to, instead of feeling so overwhelmed or almost to the point where I'm having some, maybe anxiety episode, I try to say, okay, what am I feeling? And when I went down to the feeling, I just felt scared, alone. And then when I got past the fear and I got in touch with the loneliness, and then at the end was like this, what I call, guilt, but really it's the I am bad. There's something, I am unloved, totally rejected. And that's what you feel when your wife of 12 years decides she had enough of trying and she's moving on, and, and blames it on you, of course, at least half of it on you. And you're like, what?
Half.
Weren't we more, right? Why, you think I'm having a picnic here? I'm, working really hard to try to make things work. I know it's difficult. We've already spent thousands in therapy to try to make this work. We have children. I was coming to it from a very responsible place of like, we have these children, we're going to make this work. And unfortunately, at some point, for various different reasons, and I'm doing a slight study on this, but you could say women in their 30s, there is something that just shifts often. There's a lot of us men who are in this category where we put in a lot of hard work. We brought home that paycheck by hook or by crook. We've fought to make it happen. We apologized 3 dozen times. We've many times came home with flowers. We tried our best. We did a lot of good things. And for the other person just to pull the plug. And, now I can look back and again, to quote Zach, you could tell him I quoted him a lot.
Yeah,
now I actually would thank, I wouldn't say it necessarily right to her, but I thank my ex for doing that for me, for freeing me, and now allowing me to live really my best life. Because when I was on that street corner, and I felt totally bereft, and I got to the feeling ultimately of I am bad. I am unloved. It was at that moment where I was able to feel it, own it, hold it, and then say, this is not true.
Hmm.
I am good. I know I'm good. I've always been good. And it was feeling the deep depths of the pain of rejection and I am bad that actually led me to a much deeper, much more profound idea and appreciation of how good I really am. And it was her loss. And she threw away a great guy, and I am going to nurture this now, and I'm never going to let another woman or another marriage get into that space. That's my Kodesh Kachin. That's my Holy of Holies on Temple Mount. I am good. And there were times in my second marriage where I had to go there because I did feel like it was being threatened, where I was being told very infrequently that maybe I'm not good because I'm making mistakes. I'm doing this wrong. I'm not caring enough. I'm not loving enough. I'm not sensitive enough. You know, I'm a guy, I'm out, I'm working. I'm not, I didn't call to ask how you were doing. You know, when you were pregnant and throwing up, and I totally disconnected because I'm just thinking about, I don't know, how to make a buck. So, you know, maybe I'm bad again. No, I'm never bad. I can do better. And I think that was what, you know, changed for me when I was able to then look at the person across the table and said, I can love you better. How did I know I can love her better? Because I knew I had that Holy of Holies inside me that I could always go back to loving myself better. And if I could do it for myself, then I could for sure do it for the person who I want to love as much as possible and give to as much as possible, you know, and build a life together, a life that's going to work.
So would you say, Yochanan, that's what makes the difference? In other words, it sounds like both in your first marriage and second marriage, obviously it's different circumstances and scenarios, but there is that sort of parallel that could happen where you find yourself kind of, you know, maybe under attack. And the first time around, you weren't, and when I say you, that could be any one of our, you know, listeners out there, you weren't equipped to sort of know how to say that I'm good. Whereas the second time around, the same pattern may happen. You know, one's wife may have the same sort of approach, but because you've sort of fortified yourself, you could better handle it. And as a result, the marriage can continue. Like, would you say that's one of the reasons why the first marriage, I mean, many second marriages, unfortunately,
that's 30% of it. The other 30% of it is really finding someone I felt safe enough to do that. In other words, you know, Arthur Janov has an example in his book. He takes an amoeba, you know, made famous by the Far Side, and he takes that amoeba and he puts it into a cup of water, and he puts some Indian ink into the cup. And what happens is, because you're empathic and you're a compassionate human being who has a heart, you start taking that Indian ink into your amoeba, and what happens over time is the amoeba starts pushing that black ink deeper and deeper and deeper into its nucleus, into its center, to allow the rest of it to function, to interact with the water, to be able to feed off the water, to be able to excrete into the water, right? You need to interface with your external realities. What we do with pain, what we do with wounds is we bury them deep inside. And we hold them in our core and we lock them up in there in order to allow the rest of the life of the amoeba to carry on as normal as possible. And then he takes that amoeba and he plucks it into a clean cup of water. And what eventually happens is the amoeba starts sensing that its surroundings are clean, and it starts pushing the black ink further and further and further out until its extremities, and then pushes it out and discharges all of the black ink and allows it out. So when a person's in a toxic environment, he'll just keep suppressing and pushing in order to protect what's called the regular functioning of a home. He's got to get up and go to work the next day. He's got to bring home the bacon. Ain't got time for this, you know? So what we do is we just store it in, we store it in, and then we go to marital therapy or we go to regular therapy, like we're behind the 8 ball already at that point. So if one's spouse, and I like to say, have your second marriage in your first marriage, if you can.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
In other words,
Figure it out within the marriage.
In other words, people, you know my story. And some people sometimes come to me and their spouses don't want their husbands to see me. He's like, no, Yochanan's like the poster boy for second marriage. Don't see him. He's going to convince you to get divorced and remarried. Because people who know me then and know me now see that, thank God, I'm so much happier. My life is working so much better. I'm able to work. I have clients. I have other gigs. I'm able to, really live my best life nowadays because I have a supportive home environment. And the supportive home environment for me is like a diving board into the rest of my life. I'm able to get that spring in my jump to live. Whereas before, as talented as I was, or as much as I wanted to give and as much, therapeutic value that I wanted to provide for people, I was always held back because my home environment was toxic. And I wasn't able to really feel free enough to go and travel and see and do. And I went all the way up to Katzrin to give anger management class.
Wow.
That was great. It's like a 3-hour bus ride. In my previous marriage, I couldn't do that. I couldn't just do that, do that. I always felt like I had to be close to home and kind of manage things and make sure things were okay. And I didn't feel safe enough to take that bus ride up north. Not that I never traveled, but my point is that there were obviously, I'm not painting a terrible black picture in my first marriage. There were good times and there were bad times. But overall, it was a very hard time and limited my growth as a person. So if a person can have his second marriage and his first marriage, that's achitov, that's even better, which means that they can begin to reinvent themselves and create that safety, create that trust, have the breakdown, have the crying, but you're both together in it afterwards, holding each other's hands, saying, yes, we want this, we choose each other. We choose to love you more than I choose to even love myself. I know that might sound like a contradiction to the previous idea, but it's not in a way. It's being able to just have that willingness that I want to love you as best as I can.
But doesn't that willingness take two? Like, this is what
That's what I'm saying.
I've
That's
always
what I'm
felt. Does it take two to tango? In other words, as much as that work that you're talking about, and I totally agree with you.
Absolutely.
Let's just use the example, if the wife, because as we know, and Ben's talked about this trend a lot, about the statistics. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, in almost all cases, especially these days, it's the wife that's making that decision. You talked about that study you're working on, women getting into their 30s, and I'll be very, very interested to see that study when it's out. But if the wife doesn't want to do that work together with you, it's doomed. Would you say? I mean, I don't mean to sound pessimistic, but it's doomed, isn't it?
Ultimately, yes. There is one caveat that I will add. And Harville Hendricks has this in his book called Getting the Love You Want, another great book. It's the Imago Therapy book and disciplines. And that is where when one person changes, the other person could affect the domino effect of that change. So it's not all hopeless if your spouse does not feel like changing, does not want to change, does not have the willingness. Because if you can dig deep inside yourself and begin to dance a different dance in your relationship, like I expressed, like, hey, I know I'm good. I know I'm worthy of love. You're missing out if you don't. And I've said that to my wife, my new wife, and she said that to me. She once said to me, you should be running after me. That's what she said to me. You should be like chasing me. And it was like in an argument, but she was so right. And it really hit me, partly because it was a good line. And I stopped to think about what she said. And I'm like, she's right. I should be running after her. So if a person has enough self-love, if a person has enough self-love, you will attract the other person, you will make the other person think like, yeah, I'm being an ass. I better wake up and take myself out of my ego and realize there's another person here that, I should be running after.
But that takes a tremendous amount of fortitude, Yochanan, because would you say that part of the problem, is that men, again, to use our example where it's the wife telling the man to change in the first marriage, or let's say in the current marriage, I think a lot of men kind of internalize that, and they're at the starting point of, I am bad because she's telling me I'm bad. and it's already from the wrong foot. You're already missing the foundation, because guys are saying, well, she's saying this, I'm going to change, like go to therapy, do this, do that. But the guy isn't realizing that I'm actually good. And there's just things I could work on. And that's a big problem from what I'm hearing.
Huge. First of all, kids hear the words no 17,000 times in their childhood. So you have to realize it's not just him, it's also her. Everyone feels bad. Once you could appreciate that really hurt people just hurt people. So if someone's hurting you, or if you're hurting someone, it's just because you're really hurting. So really both men and women are actually, unfortunately, and in my practice, I see this all the time. In my work for Amudim, I see this all the time. My wife likes to call it the chain of pain. We are perpetuating the chain of pain from our childhoods, from previous generation, transgenerational traumas and pain. And someone's got to be the one to stop and, change that song and begin to put in the proper messages. And like I said, easier said than done, because I was in therapy. I was hearing those messages. I was getting that message from my therapist. I was doing that work. But I have to be honest and say that as much as I did that work, and I grew tremendously, and my marriage did get better, and then there were times where it was harder, it wasn't until I experienced what they call in AA literature the gift of desperation. When I really felt alone, when I really felt so disenfranchised, so unwanted and unappreciated by another person, and I was so alone that I had the guts, and I was now safe, right? Because now I was a single dad living by myself. So there was no reason not to allow myself to feel what I really felt. And I encourage everybody here listening to have those moments, to get vulnerable with yourself, to be able to have that mushy moment where you can really let yourself feel what you feel, how broken you feel. And it's from there, that seed, that germinates, that's where you can begin to appreciate how false that belief is. Because it's only when you really can see something up close, if it's, a forgery or it's real. When you take that, the jewelers, when they take their little microscopes, those little jeweler ring things, they look and they can see the flaws in the diamond or not. When you really get up close and personal with yourself, you'll see there's no flaws in that diamond, and it's a perfect diamond. But when you're too far away from it, you can't tell, you don't know. So the doubt is what resides in place of knowledge. I encourage everybody to really get deep down with themselves and then be able to see how flawless we really are. And most people who don't feel that way, it's only because they haven't yet gotten to that place. It could be the man, it could be the woman, probably both of us. And it is a shame. I heard someone else on your podcast talk also earlier about how, we don't get a license for this. Yeah, you get a marriage license, but that just means, you paid the clerk, $45. But we don't really have enough education, premarital education, pre-father education, pre-mother education. And we kind of have to learn the hard way. So if we have a wife or a husband who's compatible, who can go and trust each other enough to be vulnerable enough with each other, to then be humble enough with each other. So you see, people are married for the first time, and God bless them. I wish them all the best in the world, because you see that they kind of found the right one, or the person that they could work with. And then there were guys like us who, despite our best intentions and our best efforts, we almost feel like, maybe we weren't compatible enough. Or in certain cases, which I heard you express on the podcast, Yoel, you felt, maybe it could have worked, but, she didn't want to at that point. She had given up. And there is a point where people give up, and it's really sad. And it would be nice if people rallied around them in that time. And I remember speaking to you personally about this, when you were going through it, still not yet divorced. If it would be nice if the friends, the girlfriends, would say, no, you can do it. He's a lovely guy and he's great. And then maybe things could have turned out differently. But unfortunately, what do we have a lot of times in our world? This negative self-empowerment. And friends saying, you deserve better. And you deserve better. And that's often terrible advice. If someone's being abused, it's absolutely correct. I work for an organization. We deal with sex abuse, we deal with violence, we deal with all kinds of things, day to day. And of course, you have to know where to draw the line. But I remember, Yoel, you particularly felt hard feelings towards your friends who just weren't there for you, who kind of took your wife's side or this side. And you're right. I agree with you 100%. If those friends who, unfortunately, they also lack the courage, they also lack the self-love, their marriage is working because it's working, not necessarily because they're so wise and reasonable, and they're kind of, limping through it. And maybe they had a bit more of a compatible moment where they're just more reasonable people, or maybe less intense people, or maybe they just had less trauma in their childhoods for whatever reason. But just yesterday, someone came over to me. I was by a bar mitzvah. Someone came over and says, "Wow, Yochanan, there's so much divorce. So many people our age are getting divorced." I'm like, "I know, it's crazy." He's like, "What do we do? It's so crazy. So many divorces." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "But I don't know what to tell my friends." He said, she said, "I don't know. I can't pick a side." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're right. You can't pick a side." I said, "All you can do is be there for them." She's like, "But how?" And I'm like, "That's a really important question. And maybe, you guys could do another podcast of maybe how we could all be better friends. And for the people who are still married, and what they can do for, if your audience can branch out to the people who are still married as well and say like, hey, what can you do for friends who are struggling in their marriage? And them to both be pretty reasonable, non-abusive people."
Right. Well, I want to pick up on I've got two questions about that. And Ben, I feel like I'm taking over. You always tell me not to apologize, so
It's amazing to see. Keep going.
I'm
The love machine.
I'm loving this. I am absolutely loving this. And also, we're recording this, in the morning, not midnight for some of our other guests. So Ben, you see the difference when I'm more awake. But anyway, but no, Yochanan, this is a credit to you. Do you feel that the term abuse gets misused and overused? In other words, I have never met a person, he could be talking about his sister, or it could be a woman who I've met. And I hope this isn't coming across negatively, but I also want to be very honest about how I feel about this. I genuinely feel, obviously, in your work with Amudim and in your private practice, definitely there are cases of abuse, 100%. I would add to that, I'm sure you would agree, that there's abuse, first of all, could go both ways. There could be abuse from men to women and women to men. I strongly feel that.
Absolutely.
But two, I have never had an instance where I've come across someone whose sister, or meeting a woman herself, who didn't say, "Oh, he was abusive." And it's like, where is this coming from? It's cheapening the term for real cases of abuse. Would you agree with that? That it's way overplayed? And again, that's not to minimize cases where it actually happens.
One of the big points of gratitude that I have towards my second wife, Shani, was she married me. And like you heard, I got remarried very quickly. Wasn't planning on doing that. I had 3 kids. I had custody. Different than I know a lot of the other cases here. I'm not going to go into all of that publicly, but there was a lot of pain, and there was a lot of realizing that I had to pick up a lot of slack at the final end of my marriage. And I was living with 3 kids in a basement apartment. And the funny thing was that I was being called abusive. I was like, well, why would I have the kids? No court would allow me to have that, but still,
I don't know a man who was not called abusive.
Exactly.
I have not met a divorced man who was not called abusive.
Right. But the problem is with people who are in a tremendous amount of pain and confusion, as divorce throws you into a whole whirlwind of hard times, and you lose your senses, you lose your sense of identity, you lose who you are. And I remember feeling like maybe I was abusive. And did I never do anything abusive? And I'm going to elaborate on this, because you're asking a very important question. And I did abusive things. There, sure. Did I ever, call her an abusive name? Did I ever, so much pain, so much intensity. We're both very intense people. We were both very intense people. But when I met Shani and I told her some of my, pain and some of what I was going through, and I was still pretty raw from my first marriage, and unfortunately for her, but to her credit, she really put up with me in those first few months of our own marriage, our whole first year, I would say, of my marriage, where I still wasn't what I would call sorted out. And she said, you're not abusive. You were forced into abusive situations where you felt so trapped, where all you could do is lash out or in defense or this, that. So
Wow.
you ask good questions, and there's unfortunately is a complex answer, right? Because as human beings, we're all capable of being abusive, but I wouldn't be abusive now to my wife, who, we're very good to each other. We try to be, at least. I would say I'm very far, even if we get into an argument, even if we say something that's less than nice or whatever it is, but I would never categorize myself as abusive now. But then in those moments, there were moments, I would say, where you feel so ugly and you can act pretty ugly at times. Thank God that was not a very deep primal wound for me, and hardly ever came out. For someone who it's more embedded, let's say they have more trauma or more abuse in their childhood or more whatever it is, maybe for them, or maybe just their personality and their character traits lead that to be more of a challenge for them, and then they're put into a toxic environment, they could tend to be more abusive. And then there's the red line, like Ben was saying, where's there a red line? There are certainly red lines where if there's a frequency and if there's a level of force, these things are important. And if there's also a power differential. So those are the three things, just from when we do assessments for domestic violence, and we have to interview abusive men or women, and we have to decide, are they actually an abuser or just someone who is being abusive, but really that's not them, and they can kind of pull that back and create safety again in the marriage. So there's frequency, there's power dynamic, how much stronger is the other person, or how much older is the other person, and then there's amount of force being used, and that could be verbal as well. So, obviously violence is not only physical, level decimals, how loud the person can get, how many things they can break, how destructive. So, most the men that come to speak to me, and I'm told by the wife that he's abusive or he's a narcissist. That's another big one I get.
Oh my
husband's a narcissist.
That's another one that gets.
So I have to convince these women. I consider it an honor and a privilege that I am in a position where I am a therapist and a marital therapist, that I could convince their spouses that nothing could be further from the truth in this case. You looked on YouTube and you watched 3 videos of a narcissist, and because you're kind of in a hard place with your spouse, you've ticked every box. But when I speak to that person, none of those boxes are ticked. So let's go and unpick, let's pick this out. Let's unpick this and see what's really going on here. And Baruch Hashem, thank God, I've been able to convince more than one spouse that their husband is not a narcissist and he's not abusive. And, let's try a different dance.
Right.
Besides going on Google and diagnosing everybody.
Right. And labeling. And my other question, I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but it came up, and as you said, we've talked about this in the past, Yochanan. You were talking about the friends sort of whispering in their ears, which is very common. And obviously nobody would suggest, I certainly won't suggest that, people don't have a right to have their friends and build whatever support system they want. But would you say that, another common theme, along with women leaving their husbands, which is more predominant these days, the woman making the decision, what I've noticed, and this is not a scientific study at all, but in many cases, women seem to be getting, not even necessarily remarried, into another relationship pretty quickly as well. So what would you say, can they say that that's vindicated them? Because we talked about the idea of like one partner, one spouse giving up or quitting, and then they go and they leave, and then they're in another relationship very quickly after the divorce. So can they say, well, that shows I was right. I found my true love. I've been vindicated. But, who says it couldn't have been worked out the first time around? So if my question isn't clear, it's because I'm very conflicted about the idea. I try to sort of make sense of it. I don't know if there's any point to it, but is that would you say that's a vindication if somebody gets into another relationship quickly after leaving their first spouse, that they've been vindicated in their decision?
In and of itself, of course not. I mean, there's in and of itself, that data point is in no way a vindication or a validation of their feelings. What one has nothing to do with the other. If the person goes on to live a very happily married life or happy with a partner, they can feel good about themselves, surely, by saying, this person certainly was much easier for me to get along with. But are they in their 20s, young and dumb and making tons of mistakes, or they're much wiser today? Are they having children together and going through all of the stresses of figuring out their identity and what their livelihood is going to be like? Do they have in-laws anymore at this point? Sometimes the in-laws are already dead. Who knows? My point is there's so many different things. We're older and wiser. Certainly, the good news is for all divorced men out there and women is that we're older and wiser now. And we can really make such a much better, to go back to Ben's question, a much more informed decision now. Your question about how do I know I'm not going to run into the same problem with another person? We can make a much more informed decision. We can really see what didn't work previously and what can work now. But sometimes a person will get into a relationship. I mean, we know this, right? We were all teenagers once. Oh, that's a rebound. That was like one of the biggest words in high school. They're just rebounding. No one should take that seriously. So we don't know what the other person is actually experiencing with their partner, and if it's working, if it's not working. Certainly, it doesn't feel good that a spouse will jump into a relationship and not take that time to reflect, because there is a law in Torah law, which is one of the beautiful things. It's actually a commandment, a mitzvah, to remarry your divorcee. For whatever reason, you divorced her because you had a heated moment, right? There was a fly in your soup, whatever the reason. You have anger management problems, whatever it is, you divorced her, and then you're home alone. And not only don't you have a fly in your soup, but you don't have soup. And you're like, maybe this was a bad idea. So it is a bit sad to see people not taking that time to reflect. And not being celibate as well, I would add.
I guess my question is, though, and this may be like somewhat, as I ask it, it may sound a bit juvenile, but I want to hear how you look at it. Like, I am a big believer that, if the marriage didn't work, obviously for whatever reason, it was meant to be and all that stuff. But, if one wants to say that a marriage can be worked on, if two people, or we talked about this before earlier in the podcast, if somebody does the work and, he or she can change how the other person views them. So how does that argument to keep working at it work when people could look at those who decided to exit the marriage and managed to get into another relationship so quickly? Doesn't that fly in the face of, why should anybody work on their marriages? Look at such and such, and look at this person and that person. They found their true love with somebody else. So why shouldn't we all just pull the plug and trade in for a better model? You know what I mean? Like, how does one make the case that, you should keep working at it, with what you have, keep with what you have, and don't just sort of hit the escape button, when people can look at many examples of people who seem to have...
People have their priorities right. So there's a hierarchy of, what we would call virtues and meaning and purpose in life. And if a person has his priorities straight, so then, he will look for purpose and meaning and ways to grow as a human being, ways to deepen his own experience in life and allow his heart to grow in ways he thought never could happen. It's like you're asking me what's the difference between paper plates and fine china. Yeah, of course. One of them is easier and you can just throw out your plate and you don't have to wash it. But the other one
Right.
is
And there's the children and all that also, obviously.
once there's children, there's nothing even to talk about. I was giving you even the benefit of the doubt where, let's say a person he's in a relationship versus another relationship.
Right. I like that. Yeah. Okay.
Like, children, of course, then a person has to really think, 17 times before he does something like that. But, and it's only if it's really, really not fixable. But, I try to always encourage couples to work hard. But when they say, well, what's the point? So people think the point of life is to, necessarily to be happy. And it's not the point, right? The point of life is love. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God himself, created the world to give. We know the Hebrew word for love is ahava. So Rabbi Tatz explains that the root of that word is hav, is to give. And that is what true love is, when you can give selflessly and endlessly, which is what God did when he created the world and created human beings. He doesn't need us. He doesn't need our adherence, our diligence, our, he doesn't need our service. He's created an environment for us to thrive by being like him, to experience what it means to be God-like. And the only way we can experience to be God-like is to be able to give unconditional love. That's the point of life. And is it always happy, the road there? Is it always feel? If a person is truly always in line with that paradigm, yeah, he'll always be happy, even when he's slogging his guts out and, waking up in the middle of the night and to care for a crying baby. And even when he's, working an extra shift so that the family could afford, a nicer home or a car or a vacation or nicer clothes or whatever it is that they want. When people are working hard, if he really always was focused on that, so then he could always be happy. But we're not. We're human beings. And it's a fight to get back to that level of appreciation where we don't lose the plot. And that in and of itself is a tremendous amount of work that the human being has to do in this world, getting back to the plot. And the plot is to give. And the plot is to be magnanimous and to become people whose hearts expand and can love. So that's the reason why you stay together. You stay together because there's so much more to love in this person. You're only reaching the tip of the iceberg. You don't love them? Guess what? You've got so much more work cut out ahead of you to learn about this person, to learn how to love. Now, the problems arise, from my experience in my life and in my clientele and in my work, is that people are wounded and people are just knocking into each other, except they're not wearing helmets. And it hurts and it's hard and it's clumsy and we don't know. So the hope is to, educate people, pull them back from their resentments. If people are, let's use that red flag again, Ben. If people are past the point of being able to be in reality, for what they are mentally ill, they have some kind of disorder, and their disorder went so unchecked for so many years that now maybe they are a full-blown narcissist. And they would need a very gifted psychotherapist and many years and maybe even inpatient program to really deprogram how much this guy hates himself or herself. So then there might be a point in time to say, this isn't working. This isn't working for us. It's not working for the kids. Someone is too broken here. And the fix is not, we've tried medication. We've tried, psychologists. We've tried swimming at 6 o'clock in the morning. We've tried biking up big hills, all of my skills and my hobbies and the things that I love. I've tried, my spouse sent me for 3 weeks to Acapulco to refresh and nothing's working. the person didn't yet get to that point, to that breaking point. So, I bless everybody to get to the breaking point where they can go past the ego, past all that defense mechanism, find the diamond inside, and then begin to, polish it every day. Wake up, say your prayers, do your meditations, ride your bicycle, whatever your hobbies are, get it in shape, and then begin to share it with those around you. But is it always possible? Well, let's be optimistic. It's always possible. It seems less and less likely nowadays, unfortunately, and we could talk about that for days of what's wrong with our world,
So I'm glad you're doing a study. I'd love to see it. We do have some data to give to it if you're citing any sources, because 63% of our listeners are between the age of 35 and 44, which sounds like it jives with what you're checking out. So I find this interesting. I'm not sure what to do with it, but that's what we see around us. It's that age plus the combination of that and 70% of women, and that's exactly what we're seeing. As far as red flags, another one from one of our listeners, they said, they're dating someone, and they asked them when their proudest moment was, and this is someone in their late 20s, and the person's answer was, I've never been proud of myself. Is that like an indicative of something? Is that a red flag you should run from when you hear something like that? What is your therapist at say?
If the person is being humble and answering from a humble place and being real and being vulnerable, if they could communicate, like I said, again, it's kind of like the same answer as before. If they can get to a point where they really feel for each other and they can really love each other and they can communicate this and they can hold that space for the pain and the hurt, maybe he's just being more vulnerable and being more honest than a lot of other people. Again, can they be compatible? Can they really get each other? Would the person entertain the idea of being proud of himself? You know what I mean? Are they willing to learn? Are they, maybe they just don't know what that means. Maybe they don't know that feeling,
How do you figure out which one it is?
Again, through the process of hopefully communicating and dating. If the person is really always depressed, and you find yourself being their caretaker in the relationship, where you're calling them to get out of bed and come on, come hang out with me. You're awesome. You're amazing. No, I don't feel like it. Come on, you're such a wonderful person. Come out. Already in the beginning of the relationship, that's what's happening. You're the nurse and he's the patient. No way. Don't do that to yourself. And if you're doing that, it's because you have your own psychological profile that needs to be worked on, that you're a people pleaser or you're a rescuer. I mean, it takes both to have these relationships. But you should be in a relationship where you feel like there is mutual benefit and love and enjoyment and fun, and it's enjoyable. If this is not something you're enjoying, if this could become a chore at any point in time, then in the dating process, that's not a relationship you want. You're not looking for a job. You're not applying to be a caretaker.
Okay. And what do you do with the conflict between your feelings and your brain? So sometimes your brain is listening to what you're saying and okay, makes total sense. But your gut, you have some emotional connection that's so strong that, if you needed to fly across the country 2 days a week, you would figure out how to do it, even though you're, sacrificing something else, because there's something more than logic there.
How do you know when the attraction is healthy and when the attraction is maybe a subconscious attraction of wounds? Of my pain is attracted to your pain. This is going to be great.
Which happens a lot, right? It happens.
What?
Which happens a lot.
Of course. I would say that it happens all the time, So, Ben, you're asking again a very good question. and a difficult question to really answer. I had the same question, and it's not lost on me that you kind of asked the same question twice. So I'm going to try to answer it for you. And in a personal story, when I was divorced and single, and I went to a gathering, camping out over the weekend, brought the kids, a bunch of other people there. There was all kinds of people there, very interesting people there. And one person was a therapist and a healer, an energy healer. And I really was fascinated by her, and I really wanted to talk to her. And she was, explaining to me how energy healing works. And I said, can you do it on me? Like, you could get away with that. One of these like hippie weekends, you can get like free work, free therapy, free healing work. Everyone's very generous with their trade. And she's like, sure. And she starts working on me. And she's like, ooh, like making all of these faces. And she's like going like this and like that. I'm like, ooh, what's happening? And she's like, this is dark. This is deep. This is, ugh. And finally she gets it out. And she's like, oh, okay, that's out, And I'm like, yeah, I think that was like my ex-wife, like, not her, but the energy between us. And I was noticing already for like the last year in my marriage that I was feeling like a little bit slouchy. My posture wasn't so great. And I would like, but only to find myself back there again. And when she finished the energy work, I was like straight, and I was breathing again, like deeper. My breath was deeper, and my body was more upright, and I was taking in more oxygen. I felt more alive. And she took out some death from me, and I looked at her pleadingly, and I'm like, how do I know that the next person I meet or want to marry or marry isn't going to like put that in me again? I'm not saying that Max put that in me, but how do I know that that's not going to happen again? Because I viewed myself as susceptible, as an empathic person, as a charming person, as someone who cares about people, as someone who wants to just make someone happy. The people pleaser, childhood wound, paradigm. So how am I going to know? And she looked at me and she said, you'll know when you meet her. And that really gave me a real sense of relief. I'm not a victim. I can do this. I'll know when I meet her. It'll feel different. It'll feel right. It'll feel good. I can do this. She gave me back the power of being able to choose for myself what's good for me. When I can breathe, when I can stand tall. Is this person making me feel like, remember that limited consciousness? Am I starting to feel like scarcity in any way, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually? Or am I starting to feel, one of the things my wife said, a word she would use every now and again, in the beginning of our marriage, she would say, you're wonderful. I cannot tell you how healing and how important it was to hear that from someone. And very telling how infrequently I ever heard that in my whole life. In my childhood and in my marriage. Someone to tell me, look at me, and now I do it to her. I stole her word. I texted her, you're wonderful. Because I know why? Because I know how good it made me feel. First of all, the word wonder is a subconscious word. It's part of our imagination. It's like there's endless possibilities. What we can wonder about. It's not limited. It's such a wonderful word.
But also her using it probably meant that it was a word that worked for her.
Yeah,
you say? Possibly.
It was part of her lexicon, right? It was part of the words that she related to. But when she would tell me, I would remember she would say that, I'd be like, something deep inside me
liked it.
Said thank you. Said thank you for that. You're making me wonderful by calling me wonderful. I want to be wonderful when you call me wonderful. So, for men who are going out and, trying again, I'm going to date again, like this person should make you feel wonderful. And you should want to make them feel wonderful because it really can be. And it's meant to be wonderful. And For all those who are still married and want to have a second marriage in their first marriage, start with calling your spouse wonderful and see, if the other spouse can change. Maybe, if you're pouring on the wonderful and you mean it from the bottom of your heart, and it can't be empty words, you have to see it. You have to get to the person's diamond. You have to see it in them. If
Are
you're
there any
living with,
are there any
just
tricks?
Ben, I just want to finish. If you're living with someone who every single day you have to polish their diamond for them and bring it out again and bring it out again and bring it out again and bring it out again, I would simply say, do not marry that person. Because you are going to become a caretaker. You are going to become like, the Notebook, where you have to remind the person of the whole story just for them to have one lucid moment for them to forget the next day.
Right. The
If
rest
you're married to that person, go visit them in the home and read them the Notebook and bring them back every single day. That's love. But I wouldn't say initially to embark on a relationship that is the nature of the relationship. Then I'm sorry for cutting you off.
No, that's good. You actually answered that second question. Then my next question is communication. I know that was one of our major issues, but the communication was a part of it, but also the conflict. Like, we never were comfortable. We never learned how to have a disagreement. We were both pleasers, I would say. And most of the time, one of us would just give in. And so we never got to the point where we could go head to head, fight it all the way through, and then know on the other end, the person will still be there.
So that's unique to have both people as pleasers in a first marriage. In a second marriage, you can't have that more. But there's something called codependence, which I'm sure you must have heard of in your journeys through hard marriage and divorce. And codependency is when we can't be ourselves in the relationship with another. Once I'm with other, we begin to get enmeshed, we begin to fuse with other. And we lose sight of who am I, what is me, and what is you, and who are you. And there's not enough of a differential to be able to analyze things and be able to say, like, this works for me and this works for you. So what should we do? And then compromise. But for each person to initially have their own voice about what works for them, what is good for me, and not to feel scared to say when something doesn't work for you, or to say, I'm scared that this doesn't work for me, and allow the other person the same space to be able to express what their feelings, and then allow the question to be in the middle of what shall we do with this? And sometimes it can go your way and sometimes it can go her way. But we don't have those tools early on in our marriage. We're coming from post high school, where or middle of college. Often, a lot of us are getting married young, and we have no idea what we're doing, and no one told us. It's the great conspiracy of the previous generation that they don't really let the younger ones know what's going on until it's too late. So, now you've gone through it. So you know what didn't work with your first wife. So I would say a person like you would be a lot less at risk for making those mistakes. You might make others.
Yochanan, I want to zoom out and I really appreciate it. Very gracious with your time. We're gonna sign off soon. But generally speaking, I think, I don't know how much it is today, but we've talked before on the podcast about this sort of feelings of stigma surrounding seeing a therapist, or, particularly, again, not to overly generalize, but I think particularly with a lot of men, certainly a lot of men that I know and that I've met, a lot of guys will just say, like, nothing wrong with me. Like we talked about the converse, where guys
Why should I go? Let her go.
Guys think that they're totally to blame for everything and they don't love themselves. But you also have the reverse, where, a lot of guys are like, nothing wrong with me. It's her problem. I don't need any help. I don't have to change anything about me.
Or the guy is happy and she's not, and he doesn't understand why.
Or the guy thinks he's happy, or the guy, or the guy's just not in touch with his emotions, or a guy, thinks,
Right,
like,
so
I don't believe in this heebie-jeebie. Like, Yochanan, like, I relate to the way you speak. Also, I would say, if I could say that you're a very spiritual person, And I certainly relate to that, but there are a lot of guys who don't relate to that. But that doesn't mean that therapy won't work for them and isn't just as vital for them. So what would you
this
say?
therapist won't work for them. Okay?
Right.
It's like a pair of shoes. They gotta fit.
Right. Right. But what would you say to guys out there, who don't feel that they quote unquote need it, or what's the point, or something like that?
So we were, it's so multi-level. Everything you're saying is there's so many levels to it, right? So, on one hand, I like to tell people, if you have a problem, then it's your problem. If you don't have a problem, then you don't have a problem. You know what I mean? Like, whoever has the problem has the problem. It doesn't have to be. If a guy's happily married, he's unhappily married. Now, does that mean he really doesn't have a problem? Does that mean he's out to lunch and he's just not aware of his problem?
Right. So what do you? Right.
There's suppressing it. He's not aware. So
right.
So there's levels of consciousness.
Right.
That which levels are my ego, and I'm fooling myself into thinking life is grand and it's hunky dory, but my wife is in her bedroom crying, and I'm just okay with that. And which part of me is in denial, can't handle that? Which part of me is, God forbid, sociopathic and just doesn't care about anybody else? That's a very damaged person, right? That's a very sick individual, is a sociopath or a psychopath. So where is this person for real? So a person might come into my office, a couple might come into my office and say, I had this actually a few months ago. So he's sitting on the couch, body language totally cold. She schlepped him in. She's losing sleep. She's high anxiety. She can't sleep. She's desperate. It took her months to make this appointment because he wasn't good for him, and she canceled it. At one point, I was like, I'm going to cancel you guys until you confirm that you're coming. Like, no more appointments. But they finally came in. She's very activated, and he's like half asleep. I don't know why you're here. I don't know. Ask her. Literally like that one. Ask her. So my work in the session was to ask him, does he not have a problem with the fact that his wife is in pain and literally crying right next to us? Like, where is he? Is it because it hurts him too much to be a failure? Is it this? So I will sometimes go straight for the jugular with a guy. Sometimes I'll see that that's because he had a lot of defense mechanisms that I knew I wasn't really hurting him. I knew all I was doing was breaking one shell, but there was going to be more work. So it really, really, really depends. That's unfortunately the answer to your question of where is this person really? How many layers is he hiding behind, or she is hiding behind? How much of it is real anger? How much of it is just, I'm so used to always being angry, so that's just how if I'm a hammer, every problem is a nail. So
well, I'll tell you, and obviously it's not my business per se. Like God knows I've got plenty of my own work to do on myself. So I'm not suggesting that I'm the expert, but I come across so many people, and particularly men. And it's interesting because I'm not a therapist. And again, I don't claim to be the world's, I'm not a psychologist, but I feel that energy. I know that they could really use therapy. Like I could see it as a non-expert, and it frustrates me. And, you can ask, why does it frustrate me? That's a whole deeper concept. But
I was one of those men.
Sorry?
I was one of those men.
So was I.
How do you think I got into therapy? I had a friend who pushed me in.
Me too. But I'm saying, but there's nothing one can do. Like, I don't want to say there's nothing. I don't want to make it sound hopeless, but I feel like there's tons of men out there, and I'm sure many listeners who can really benefit from it, but are sort of have this idea of like, it's for the birds, or it's like, it's silly.
Absolutely.
They're going to plant ideas in my head that are crazy.
Absolutely.
I don't need it because I'm fine. I'm healthy. The whole problem was her. It's not me.
I have people coming into the office who still feel that way. So, I call them pre-therapy clients. Where really your therapeutic work is just helping them appreciate and understand the need for therapy. I mean, I spent also a great story. This guy sat on my couch. We went through what I do and how to do. We did a little bit of a demonstration, and he's like, He's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to. How long is it going to take? You're just going to take my money. You're just going to keep me on this couch for months at a time. And I'm already, part of my problem is that I'm already financially struggling. So this is just adding to my problem.
Right.
And
Which
like,
I understand that concern. The financial.
No, totally. He was right.
Yeah.
So it's up to me. First of all, I had to really believe that I could help him.
Right.
And I'm not for every person. So first of all, I saw in this person that this is the type of person I could help. So first of all, I just told him, I was like, how about this? Just do this for homework. Come back next week and we'll take it from there. My opinion is that I could help you. It's my opinion. And I think it would be worthwhile coming. So he came back. The next week, very similar. We did a bit of a session and then he went on saying, oh, no. We spent half the session debating therapy. At the end of it, I told him, I got a little bit fired up and I said, listen, if we're constantly going to be debating therapy, then we're definitely not going to get therapy done. I made a contract with him. I said, give me 3 sessions to sell you my wares of what I think I can do for you. If at the end of those 3 sessions, you think this is a waste of time, no love lost, we'll go our separate ways. Hopefully I will have taught you something. I do believe I have what to teach you. If not, if you don't feel it's worth it, that's okay. Give me, and sometimes I do that with people. Sometimes it's just I go into contract with them. My friend who got me into therapy, he got me into therapy. He offered to pay for the first few sessions because I was not going to pay for it.
Right. Although I would say
that was my hang up.
Yeah, but I've told many men, and I believe I made this mistake in my marriage where, the financial, the cost was a big consideration. And again, money concerns are very real, but I wouldn't recommend going to somebody just because you got some sort of deal or it's some sort of, somebody push you. That may be a good, spur to get in there, but it could be dangerous too.
I told my anger management group that therapy is a lot cheaper than a second apartment.
Exactly. Or a divorce lawyer.
Divorce lawyer, even worse. Yeah, be like, I have people whose wives are ready to, they have to move out or I'm going to move out and they won't pay for therapy. Right. I'm like, let's do the math on this, and obviously it's only when I feel like I have a good rapport with a client that I have something to offer him. Yeah. Yoel, you know me well enough. I'm not.
You don't need my validation to vouch for you, but I can vouch for our audience and listeners definitely.
Right. It's but you guys are doing fantastic work and are really providing a meaningful service. I commend you both. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have credit to Ben. This was Ben's brainchild, so I give credit to Ben for this. And speaking of which, Ben, anything else before we let this wonderful, that just came to my mind. This wonderful therapist Yochanan go. Yeah, Ben. Anything else that?
I have 2 things. One, you seem like a very pro-marriage therapist. I don't know if that's true or not, but do you believe there's a such thing as pro-divorce therapists? I'm asking because when I went to therapy, we went to couples therapy, and then I also went on my own. More because she wanted me to go. I was doing my own work on myself as opposed to going through therapy, and her from a medical background, I don't think she believed that anything was being done because I didn't go pay somebody to do it and see someone. Anyway, so my therapist said, no therapist in their right mind would see the work that you're doing and tell her to get divorced unless she doesn't want to be married. Do you think there are pro-divorce therapists? Because that's one of the theories going around.
The notion of pro-divorce and anti-divorce is already antithetical to a good therapist, obviously.
I know.
I'm not meant to be having our own opinions and our own kind of pushing people one way or another. The hope of a therapist, at least what I consider real valuable therapeutic work, is, like I said, the goal of getting to the diamond. The goal of getting to the diamond. Sometimes clients will come in, they want to talk about their spouse. I'm like, we can, but let's focus on the diamond. So I call the person who wants to focus on that also a pre therapy client. In other words, his life is so tumultuous. Go back to that word where we started. His life is so tumultuous that, it's not working for him to the point where it's dysfunctional. So then we need to okay, we're not looking for that diamond right now. We're looking just to regain function and calm the waters so we can have a working environment with which it feels safe enough to get back to that diamond. But now to not dodge your question, Ben, because you deserve to be answered straight up. But that's the official answer. But now just to talk to you mano el mano is that I went to my supervisor and I asked him, what do you think? What's your shita on marital therapy and marriage? So he said to me, Yochanan, I consider myself the gatekeeper, the goalkeeper, the goalie in front of the husband and wife trying to kick that ball through the net. If they can get it through the net, okay. But I work as hard as I can to not let them get it past the net. Some people come in here demanding divorce or whatever it is, and he tries to fight back. That was my teacher. That was my tutelage, if you will, from my supervisor. And I understand what he's saying. I argue with him here and there because I said, well, what about this case? And what about that case? And, this person, a serial sex offender cheating on their spouse or whatever. There's terrible cases, which, we should never have to know about. We should never have to go through, and our friends should never have to go through, and all humanity. But there are times, so every now and again, I get one past the goalie. In other words, every now and again, I convince my supervisor to allow me to suggest it to someone who is literally, I see him he's just hanging himself time and time again. His wife is out there, a serial sex predator, who knows what's going on, refusing to get the help she needs, and vice versa. There are times where things really are just where things are just going in a way that people are staying married just for the sake of staying married. But there's nothing else in it. My supervisor has no problem with that. He says, yeah, that's right. He's very old-fashioned. He's older. He's an older man from a different generation. And he the whole time is having these conversations with couples. Yes, you're not going to get what you want. But, can we say that 51%? Can we say at least financially it makes sense to stay together? And it makes
statistically for the children, it makes sense. In theory.
Correct. And for the kids. And that's something that he pushes. And he's taught me. And I mean, he didn't need me to teach that because, I also grew up with, in an old fashioned world, more than the younger people I'm seeing today. And that has been the ethos of my generation as well, my parents' generation, certainly. But I would say divorce is an extreme exception to the rule. When you come up from, we did mention when there's no children, so I'm a little bit more inclined to hear, why this is not working. If two people are not compatible and there is a serious mental health disorder on one side of the equation, so then I kind of, have a, coming to God talk with someone and say, listen, your spouse is mentally ill. You don't have children. You have to really love them or choose this, because to live in it with resentments is not the high road. So you have to really dig deep in your heart and know if you're going to love this person, great. But if you're going to hate this person and now begin to start a family with this person because you can't get divorced. Sometimes the pathology is the other way. Sometimes people are holding on to something in a pathological way. It's rare. I would say most cases, my goal certainly is to keep people married.
Okay. And so one last thing back to your study. I don't know if you can put it in it, but there is a theory that these therapists that these women are going to are pushing them in the divorce. You only live once, live for yourself. Yourself comes first. Everybody else doesn't matter. Forget the kids. You need to be true to yourself. I haven't seen
it, but I've heard it.
I know. So I'm saying if there's a way to incorporate that into your study, it may add to the insights that you're looking for.
Not exactly my study. It's another therapist working with a machon here in Jerusalem, and we have a certain amount of information. They have a certain amount of information, and we kind of like are in the email stages of like trading some information. Wouldn't say it would be disingenuous for you to think that I'm actually sitting there creating a study. I'm not doing that, but it's I use the word more colloquially, studying it. But we have some interesting information.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, it's kind of also the mental illness piece is something also very, very interesting. You know, whether it's bipolar or BPD, disorders, different things that are also on the rise today. Adult ADD or PTSD, things like that. And listen, these things are all major, major challenges. And, you know, it is important to get help with these challenges. And if you feel that someone is pro-divorce ever, speak up and say, hey, I feel like you're pro-divorce. You know, what's going on over here? And or to be very early on in the therapy, speak to your spouse and say, hey, I feel this person is like not the right person for us. You know, to have these conversations.
It's easier when you're both going and they're not going separately and you don't know.
Correct.
Okay. So we like to leave. So we like to leave our listeners with some words of wisdom for people that are thinking about it, going through it, have been through it, you know, something that they should have in mind. Maybe how to pick a therapist would be a great idea. I think your insights into that would be super helpful. And anything else that, you know, you've been through it and you got through it somehow with your guitar and
I had a whole thing here that I didn't say a word about. Hilarious.
Oh my goodness.
I wrote down, maybe we'll do a separate podcast. But
we'll have to get you on round 2, Yochanan, for sure.
My personal story and what I would say not from a therapist point of view.
Oh my goodness.
But
we can cut it here and we can go for part 2 if you'd like, but it's your time.
I will just say this, and you can edit this out if you want, but I will just say this. More important sometimes than a good therapist is a good friend. And to understand what it means to have a good friend. A friend who really cares about you and really loves you and isn't scared to tell you the truth. And that's important. So that's what I would say.
We say this all the time to each other.
It really can't be underestimated how important, you know, friends can be. And it says in Chazal, it says in the rabbinic literature as well, Knei lecha chaver, acquire for yourself a friend. Why the word acquire? Because it's something that takes acquisition. You have to work at it. You have to invest. You have to put work in. Sometimes you may even have to take them out for dinner and pay for it. Doesn't matter if you have more
pay
money
for their
than them.
therapy.
Right. Therapists or someone you pay to talk to.
No, or pay your friend to go to therapy.
Or pay your friend to go to therapy.
But Yochanan, would you agree? I've found that, you know, at least
if you have more money than them, you know,
no,
where the charity lies.
But I think there's two types of, you know, I'm simplifying, but two types of friends that I found helpful for me. You know, one is.
One second, I'm cutting you off for a second because I told my wife I'd be done by now, so I just want to check in with her for a second.
Oh, okay, but no, I was about to end with this, but okay, go ahead.
Okay, you're ending with this? Okay,
we're ending with this. I was just going to say very quickly that you definitely want friends who will tell you the truth and not what you want to hear. But I also don't want to minimize the importance of having the friends who also will give you that chizuk, that reinforcement. I have a very, very dear friend, and that's what he does for me, and I find that very valuable as well. But definitely, it's important to have friends who will tell you what you don't necessarily want to hear. But we'll let you go. But
and to look for also people who you can look up to, who you feel are humble, wise people, who you feel like you respect that person. Like talk it out with them and be honest with them.
Yes.
You know, and if they give you some generic high road answer of like, well, it's all from God, son, then push back, because you have to find someone you could really express your heart to and are wise and humble. Usually wise and humble, a person will allow for your space as well.
Amazing.
Yep. Well, thank you for coming. We really appreciated this. I think our listeners and our viewers, this is invaluable information.
This
And,
is
and thanks
awesome.
for letting us entertain and get into your brain a little bit and your sharing your story. And thank you everyone for listening to Too Dad to Quit podcast. We can find us on toodadtoquit.com, Too Dad to Quit on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and we're growing the places we can be found. Please reach out to us. We want to share your story. As you can see, everyone has a different story, and your story can help someone. There's many other people in the world that play guitar, and hopefully this will help one of them. So we will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Too Dad to Quit podcast. Available at toodadtoquit.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.